In 1973, at 14, you joined the Air Cadets 119 Squadron and played the drums in the band. But it's... How cruel this laughter is. But it's time to think about a career. Armed with your A-levels from John Leggett's Sixth Form College, you target Grimsby RAF Recruitment Office. On the 13th of November, 1978, a week before your 19th birthday, you sign on for 20 years. Now, 20 years is a long time to sign up for anything. You must have been absolutely sure.
Not very smart, maybe, but yes, at the time. I'd have signed my whole life away at 18, certainly.
Well, it was more than you've lived, actually, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Well, after officer cadet training at Henlow, Bedfordshire, you're off on a string of postings to RAF bases in York and Anglesey, where in 1981 you earn your wings. The following year, love is in the air when Karen, then a flight lieutenant and a rank above you, catches your eye at RAF Binbrook in Lincolnshire, and in July 1983 you marry. Now, Karen, Operation Wedding Day didn't go all that smoothly, did it?
No, that's right, Michael. John was having drinks with the squadron on a front lawn near the church, expecting the bridesmaids to arrive in a vintage Rolls, which was his cue to run into church, only unbeknown to him the car had broken down. So it was at the last minute somebody spotted the bridesmaids were already there, and they just managed to get into church before I did.
Should have flown there, really. In 1984, your training includes a stint in the Falklands in the aftermath of the main conflict, working behind the scenes in the operations room. Back home, and now a flight lieutenant, you seize your chance to realize the dream inspired nearly 20 years earlier, and you apply to join the legendary Red Arrows. You passed a rigorous selection procedure with flying colors and notch up your first Arrows sortie in April 1987. In a TV documentary made at the time, you explain how it felt.
Certainly before I joined, I had a certain impression of what the job was. Until you actually fly with the team, you'll never know. I mean, my first trip with the team, I was petrified. I've never seen so much hardware so close to me, actually doing incredible things. And I went home, having done 2 days with the team, coming for selection, and I said to my wife, I said, there's just no way I could do that.
Now, that was a rare misjudgment. How did you break the fear barrier?
I think most of the guys will say that their biggest fear is of letting each other down, but I think it's a brave man who says the first time he flies inside the team, he isn't actually aware of his own safety and his own limitations for a very short while.
Well, once you were qualified, your feet weren't allowed to touch the ground. In your first fortnight as a Red Arrow, you fly for the King and Queen of Sweden and for our own Queen. The following year, you team up with someone who knows a thing or two about high-speed travel. He flew with your squadron, Nigel Mansell.
Hi, John. Red 5 to Red 1. Good evening, Michael. I'm glad to see you've got him. Well, do you remember that fly pass you did for us last year when we opened the golf club? It was fabulous. The only thing is, you're 10 minutes late. But seriously, John, well deserved. Have a fabulous evening. And good night to you all. See you, Michael.
Thank you, Nigel. Now, for anyone who might imagine that a Red Arrow's life is all glamour and fun, 1988 also brings a reminder that in the aerobatics business, danger is never far away.
But as the first group of 4 jets left the ground, something went wrong with the last one. It fell back onto the runway. The pilot fired his rocket-propelled ejector seat and blasted clear. The tanks carrying dyed diesel fuel for the Arrow's famous smoke trails exploded as the sliding jet ground them along the runway. But the pilot was clear, and he survived with cuts and the usual back injuries that ejector seats bring.
Well, that accident shocked everyone in the RAF and came just a few months after one of your good friends, Red Arrow's pilot, Flight Lieutenant Neil McLaughlin, was tragically killed during a training routine, a crash you witnessed. In your 3rd year with the Reds, you take on the most daring role in the entire display, leading the synchro pair. You perform the kind of feats that leave crowds gasping.
There we go. Okay, over the top.
Now, you stayed cool as he flew that jet straight at you, and he's heading your way again now.
Tonight, JR, I was determined not to miss you.
Your other half in that daring duo, former Flight Lieutenant Stephen Johnson. Now, Steve, when your jets pass head-on, there's a combined speed of 800 miles an hour. How does that feel?
Well, as you can imagine, flying the synchro, there's quite a lot of adrenaline out there. And a couple of miles apart, you can probably only see the nose light obscured by smoke. And then a few seconds later, rushing past the canopy. And when John and I flew the synchro, he flew the lead aircraft, and it was my job as the number 2 to miss him and make the crossers look like we were going to hit. And obviously that takes a lot of mutual trust, and we both had that. And it's been a great honour to fly with him.
Well, he knew you were reliable because he asked you to be his best man. Thank you, Steve Johnson.
Yeah.
At the end of your season as synchro leader, you're awarded the Queen's Commendation for valuable service in the air. Now, Red Arrow team members are first and foremost, of course, professional Air Force pilots. And in 1989, after 3 exciting and happy years with the Arrows, you returned to regular duties and are posted to Germany. In 1993, after the end of the Gulf War, you fly high-risk policing missions over Iraq. Recalling those days, your colleague, Flight Lieutenant Gary Waterfall. Gary, those missions over Iraq were pretty dangerous, weren't they?
Yes, they were. It was after the Gulf War had finished, and we were involved in Operation Warden, and that involved policing northern Iraq and providing comfort to the Kurds. Most of that job was reconnaissance, flying over live surface-to-air missile sites, seeing whether they'd moved or whether they were active at that time. We had a lot of targets to seek out. However, JR, as ever, seemed more concerned about which particular chicken dish he was going to eat down on the strip that night.
Which you did several times a week, I'm told.
4 or 5 times a week.
Avoiding each other's slipstream, I'm sure. Thank you, Gary Waterfall. After your spell of active duty in the Gulf, you're invited to return to the Red Arrows, this time as leader. As well as being prestigious, the job has its pressures in the air. The other pilots all keep their eye on the leader. If you were to fly slightly erratically, that would be magnified throughout the formation. And for most of the time, only you are allowed to speak in flight. So the entire team is hanging on your every word. Now, this sounds quite impossible to me. How do you do it?
I shout, I think. We have many people now who fly with the team comment on how sort of hyped up people sound on the radio. And a while ago, when we were training in Cyprus, I wasn't doing it deliberately, but they said to me that you sound pretty depressed. And I said, well, I'm not depressed. But after that, I realized that you have to put a lot of effort into the voice, and it actually comes back. And I can tell now how the show's going by the way people are actually speaking on the radio.
But you're up front. I mean, how can you be sure the team is following your orders?
I have to look in the mirrors, Michael, yes.
You've got wing mirrors?
Absolutely. Inside.
Silly question. Inside, right. Flight Lieutenant Richie Matthews, now you fly red 4 on the outside right position behind John. How difficult is it to stick in tight formation?
It is very difficult, but especially in our first year. We do 6 months of winter training consisting of 5 days a week, 3 sorties a day. At the end of that 6 months, we're awarded our red suits. And obviously, with an extremely talented man like John leading us, it makes our job much easier.
Easier, but not easy. Well, your greatest triumph, the team's first ever world tour, lasted 6 months and took you across 4 continents. For your engineers and ground crew, known as the Blues, shifting 13 tons of equipment to Sydney was a logistical nightmare.
And believe you me, you take a lot of looking after, boss.
From the ranks of the Blues, Chief Technician Kev Rutter. Now, Kev, you call him the boss. Has he got a nickname for you?
Nickname's probably the Silver Fox or the Old Man.
What are your main duties?
Well, basically, it's the difference between being a pit stop and a nanny. You prepare the aircraft for flying during the day, hours before the pilots get up. We do display flying. At the end of the day, we put them to bed, and the pilots. Prepare for the next day's flying.
Thank you very much indeed, Kev. Now, John, you're about to retire at the end of your final year with the Red Arrows, and your successor, Squadron Leader Simon Meade, was in the cockpit with you when you flew into Cranwell today. Simon, will John Rands be a hard act to follow?
Hard act is the word, I think. John's put this highly successful team together, and they perform consistently excellent shows. Now the season's ending, 4 of these pilots depart, and I get 4 new guys. So we have to build it up all over again, and we'll strive to reach that benchmark that John has given us. And that teamwork doesn't come by accident. That is purely down to John's skill as a leader. And that is going to be a tough act to follow.
Now, as a tribute to your leadership of the squadron, you were awarded an OBE in the last birthday honours list. During your 6 years with them, the Arrows have become more than ever an international symbol of British excellence. Your fans around the world have marvelled at your skills. And finally, someone who less than an hour ago was attending a top-level meeting in London. He arrived a few minutes ago. There wasn't actually much chance of him being late because he runs the RAF. Chief of the Air Staff, Air Chief Marshal Sir Michael Graydon. Well, Sir Michael, you think very highly of this officer?
I do. It's not just because he's been a thoroughly professional frontline pilot, because all the Red Arrows have been. It's not just because he's led the Red Arrows with such distinction for 3 years, because many people have done that. But it's because, I think, as this program has brought out, he's taken the Red Arrows on a quite unique world tour. And he's done it with enormous distinction. I've seen them flying in South Africa and in Malaysia. They've had rave reviews wherever they've been. It's been outstanding. I think John would be the first to acknowledge that it's been a great team performance. He's had tremendous top cover. He's had the marvellous support, of course, from the Reds themselves, from the ground crew, from the C-130 chaps who followed them all the way round. But as has been said, at the end of the day, the buck stops with the chap up the front. And John, you've led them with tremendous distinction, and I don't think it's too trite to say that you've put a bit of underlining under the great in Great Britain. Well done.
So, thank you.
Thank you.
And there's more. There's somebody else who's a great fan of yours, and it comes from Clarence House. It's from the Commandant-in-Chief of the Central Flying School, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. And it says, "I was delighted to learn of the tribute which is being paid to you this evening for the Red Arrows, which you have led so brilliantly and which have thrilled and excited crowds throughout the world by their skill and expertise. I offer you my warmest congratulations, and I send you my best wishes for the future." Signed, Elizabeth R.
And so for the young lad who began as an Air Cadets drummer boy, the RAF Cranwell Staff College Band will play us out with something you've not heard before, the newly composed Red Arrows March. John Rands, OBE, this is your life.
Fireworks safety next on BBC One with Lifesavers and 999.